This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the January, Friday the 13th episode of the DRF Players Podcast, show number 203. We're just going to dive right in here. Mike Hogan from the DRF offices in New York. Feel things a little spooky around there today?
Extra spooky, Pete. Extra spooky.
Jonathon Kinchen, the other member of the usual crew, joining me, your host, Thomas Fornatale, on the Friday the 13th edition of the podcast. How about where you are down in Planet, Texas? Is there anything ghoulish going on? Any black cats crossing your trail on the way to your private jet this morning?
I've already got off the private jet. I have two things. One, I'm in Planet Lexington, America,
nice.
At my friend Jake Ballas's house, and he told me to go down to the basement to record the podcast, and I said, hell no, that's where the scary people live. So I'm not going to the basement. I'm going to be walking around up here. The second thing is I'm not scared of the 13th anymore because my son was born on the 13th, so now it's the luckiest number for me, where for other people they might think it's unlucky.
I like it. You got to watch out for those handicapping zombies in Jake Ballas's basement, I've heard. It could be things can get hairy.
So, Pete, I'm disappointed you didn't make a Ramones reference there, right?
That would have worked too. I usually leave the musical stuff to you on this show, Mike. Though.
Okay, fair enough.
That's my sort of default position. But better late than never. We're up to the hour, a little bit late, but Mike Hogan pulled this one out of his back pocket, we'll say, and got the equipment working. Hopefully we have the same sound quality we did on Tuesday. It was a pleasure to listen back to a few minutes of Tuesday's show. Hopefully we've got this going forward and working out. Of course, the podcast typically, so this is going to be broken in 2 weeks' time, as we'll discuss. We broadcast live on Tuesday and Friday from 11 to 12. You can also find archive version of the podcast through your normal channels, iTunes, etc., SoundCloud. You can download a file directly from drf.com. If you're interested in checking us out live, Spreaker is probably the easiest thing. You can also just follow us on Twitter, find links there. You also have the option with our Tuesday shows of following along on Facebook Live. We come together twice a week to discuss various silliness like Friday the 13th and handicapping zombies, and punk rock music. But more typically, we talk about things in horse racing. The Tuesday show, a recap of the previous weekend. The Friday show, a look ahead. Today's show, we're going to have a special guest segment. We might get to that sooner rather than later, Mike, where we have Mary Rampellini, the Oaklawn correspondent, of course, for Daily Racing Form, going to be joining us to give us a little preview of that meeting. But before we do that, the topic of Oaklawn, very exciting for a lot of horse players. And this ties in to a question, actually multiple questions we received in the wake of last week's show when we talked briefly about computer bettors. Had a lot of people say to us, hey, talk a little bit more about computer bettors. JK, I'm going to have you explain why that question about computer bettors ties in so nicely with Oaklawn Park.
Yeah, well, the tricky thing about it is there's big pools at Oaklawn Park. Considering it might not appear to be one of the largest situations we have, but I think the tricky part about it is there's big full fields, and what computer bettors attempt to do is they attempt to bet everything as efficiently as they possibly can. You might be a big bettor and you're betting $200 trifecta boxes, but they're investing the same amount of money that you're investing, but they're betting every combination efficiently because they're having a computer spit out those bets for them. So they're betting each combination, if it's going to come 3-1-4, that's the trifecta. They're going to have the 3-1-4 combination bet as efficiently as it possibly can be when you're betting it fairly inefficiently from a mathematical standpoint. That's the kind of the roundabout way of explaining.
I think that's a good description of how uploaded bets work and what are sometimes called batch bets. But Oaklawn, the significance of it regarding computer players is they ain't allowed. And that means that there's an opportunity for a lot of horse players, even professional level horse players, who've told me their numbers at Oaklawn are better than New York and California, where the computer bettors are reigning, making exotic payouts very efficient. At Oaklawn, it's a little bit more like the old days. I'm sure there are still ways to use computers, but when you have to manually punch in bets, the kind of bets Jonathon was describing for the trifecta, instead of punching 6 bets, they'll be punching. I should have done the exact math on this example. I don't have it in front of me, but let's just say they're punching 20 different combinations the way that things are weighted in an exotic bet. You just physically, it's a lot harder to do when the computer isn't allowing you to bet directly into the pool the way it is at most racetracks in America. And therefore, I think in a lot of ways, a smaller player, you are looking for a track to focus on. Oaklawn might be one because you're fighting on even terms, I think, with some of the best players in America. But let's back up and talk a little bit more about the process of coming up with how these computer players operate. And that is to have, not unlike a mathematical model that might be used on Wall Street, to come up with the prices that each horse should be in a race. And once you have that, you can look at what different prices various exotic wagers might be, whether it's the exact and the double or the easiest, because boom, that information's right there in a probable pay. But these are sophisticated mathematical minds who go beyond that and have ways of estimating what a pick 3 might be, or even a pick 4, or even a pick 6, and having the computer help them basically outsource the writing of the bets to the computer to then be able to bet these, as Jonathon described, as efficiently as possible. Another thing you can't really talk about computer players without saying is how much this ties into rebates, because the idea in most instances isn't I'm going to make a 20 cent on my dollar profit with a computer player. The idea might be I'm going to take a 8-cent loss on my overall plays, but I'm getting an overall rebate of 11%. So now I can bet phenomenal amounts of money and make 3% on my money, and that turns into being a very big number. So that just a little bit more on that. There's some good information online about computer betting. Mike, I don't know in your role at DRF if you've encountered any of these type of players or database-oriented players. A lot of them will use database-type information to help create the mathematical model in the first place. But is it something you have any experience with?
No, I haven't encountered any of them, but I will note this. You said that computer bettors are not allowed at Oaklawn. However, you can bet through Oaklawn or bet Oaklawn through DRF Ticketmaker. So you can do these complicated combinations like Jonathon does where he weights things real heavily. And if you bet through Ticketmaker, it'll handle it. So there's that. Yeah,
that's an excellent point. There are certainly some tools, and there might be some modified ways. I don't know if any of the ADWs who take Oaklawn allow you to upload tickets. That would certainly be a way for sophisticated bettors doing a lot of this math stuff to continue to have some of their edge at Oaklawn, but it's not the same. And as I said, having talked to professional players betting there, it's the best track for a lot of horse players, and I don't think that can be a coincidence. Do you, Jonathon?
No, not at all. 100%. No, and like I mentioned earlier, it's a great place because to bet. Well, it's got great mutual payoffs because, which we'll talk about a little bit later, there's so many horses shipping in. There's so many horses coming off of layoffs, and you can just really find some underlaid prices with horses there. It's a tough place to do well. It's usually a focal point for an NHC champion or someone who's winning at the NHC to catch a couple of big ones there at Oaklawn.
Underlaid favorites, overlaid contenders. That's what we're looking for.
Full fields. And the other nice thing, if you don't normally follow the Arkansas circuit, is it's only dirt. So you don't have to worry about if your focus is more on dirt racing, you don't have to worry about oh, okay, the third race is on turf, and then they go to the dirt, and I want to do a pick 3, but I got to spread. You can focus on a single surface, and you can focus on horses that do well on that surface, and that's easier for some players.
All right, little production meeting in the middle of the show. Before we play the conversation I had with Mary yesterday, we're all going to mute our microphones this time, right, JK? I guess he's already muted, which is beautiful.
I thought that there would be some. I thought there would be a little
planned joke or not, but it worked out.
Well, it was muted, and then you said it, and then I said this would be a great joke for me not to say anything and just sit there in silence. So I'm here.
Last time, that joke only works if you happen to be one of the podcast fans listening live last time when we got to listen to Jonathon take a shower or do something. I don't know. There was all kinds of noises going on.
I cut it out of the. I think I cut it out of the one that we put on for people that download or listen after the fact. But the 40 some odd people that were listening live heard Jonathon. Who knows what he fold laundry or.
Let's just say if that did, if that went out to a wider audience, we might have some problems with the FCC. All right, without further ado, here's the conversation from yesterday. I want to welcome back to the DRF Players Podcast with Open Arms, Mary Rampellini. Mary, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Pete. We're getting ready for the Oaklawn meet in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
I said this last year, and I didn't make good on it, but this might be the year when I finally get down there. I hear so many good things about Oaklawn and just the general vibe and the racing experience there. How would you describe the atmosphere at Oaklawn, Mary, for someone like me who's never been there?
Yes, Hot Springs, Arkansas is definitely a racing town. It's everybody in the community is really zeroed in on what's going on at the track. And, that makes the on-track experience fabulous because the folks that are there, it's a fun crowd, it's a loud crowd, and they're really into the races. They're down on the rail, they're into what's going on. And if you're a racing fan or you make your living in racing, it is very encouraging to spend a Saturday afternoon at Oaklawn Park.
Sounds like it has that Saratoga of the South feel, which is pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna really try to do it. Which are the best days? Would you recommend coming in for one of the big days, or would you say it'd almost be better to go to to a random Saturday? What's your opinion on that?
Well, Saturdays are good always, but I do think that a big race day there is an accelerated vibe, if you will, an excitement because they stack a lot of their major stakes on a Rebel Day. You'll have a lot of horses that are prepping for the Racing Festival of the South later in the meet on that day. And the Rebel is a $900,000 stakes for 3-year-olds. So it's, got that Triple Crown looking ahead feeling to it. And that's usually the second biggest business day for Oaklawn Park. And then Arkansas Derby Day is really, a big tradition in the state and certainly been a key race for the Triple Crown over the past 10, 12 years. And that's a day you might have about 65,000 people on track, people, celebrating the Derby in the state and, spilling over into the infield, parties in the infields, tents in the infields. Have a nice run through, too, for horses that are set or making their way on to the Kentucky Derby. It's kind of like a mini prep that way.
Very interesting.
For Churchill.
All right, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get my act together and get down there this year, and I'll force you. I'll force you to show me around, give me the tips, and get some good experiences down there in Hot Springs. What are the things you're looking forward to heading into this meet? I know you have a preview of the meet up on DRF.com right now. Your analysis of Oaklawn appears in DRF every racing day. As you sit here on the precipice of the 2017 meet, what are the big stories?
Well, I think, always the 3-year-old program is important to the Oaklawn, racing scene. Everything's geared towards that Arkansas Derby, whether it's the preps like the Smarty Jones, which will be run on Monday, or even allowances in some maiden races. You're seeing a lot of young talent. So that's a big thing about this meet, that young talent, seeing those newly turned 3-year-olds and seeing what's out there this time of year. You have also the purse structure here has just grown every year. general manager Eric Jackson. That's a long time to keep stacking the purses like that. The claiming activity is fun. It's crazy. They had $7 million in transactions among stables last year over the course of a 56 date meet. That's a lot of horses going barn to barn. That's a big deal. And, I think one of the key stories as well is, Eric Jackson, who's been the general manager since 1987. This will be his last season in that position. He is going to move on and do some special projects for Oaklawn. So kind of a changing of the guard at the top.
That can sometimes have ripple effects, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's talk for a minute from a handicapping perspective for some players looking to get involved in Oaklawn this year. And I know there are many, for various reasons. Oaklawn, when I talk to high-level horse players, is one of the places where they do the best. And there are a lot of different reasons why that may be. So I think it's something that novice players should be trying to pay more attention to. Maybe we can give some of those novices a head start by talking a little bit about the top jockeys and trainers and who we can expect to be moving horses up and the names we'll see at the top of those standings as the meet progresses.
Sure. Well, Hall of Fame trainer Steve Asmussen won the title last year at Oaklawn, and he settled in for the meet. And Steve always has a lot of nice young horses, in particular, that come out during the Oaklawn season. Wayne Lucas, another Hall of Famer, does very well during the Oaklawn meet. He's always got some young horses coming up as well. And you've got barns like Brad Cox. Trainer Brad Cox, very high percentage outfit everywhere. Certainly has mastered Oaklawn. He's been here several years and wins at a very high clip here. Those are some of the barns that do very well. Chris Hardman is a good outfit. He's won a training title at Oaklawn, and he's always one to watch as well.
What about in the irons? Who are we going to be looking for to be winning the majority of races, as the top riders so often do?
Sure. Well, it's interesting this weekend, Pete. Jose Ortiz is going to be in town for 4 days. He's going to ride opening weekend. And that's in part, largely by request for trainer Ron Moquette, who's bringing him in to ride some horses. And he also kind of fills a void this weekend in that Ricardo Santana Jr., who's been the leading rider here for the past several years at Oaklawn, he's sitting out a few dates from an old suspension for a riding infraction last year at Oaklawn. So he's kind of missing these first few dates, and Ortiz is in town for that. Hall of Famer Calvin Burrell is back riding after retiring at this meet a year ago, and he's named on quite a few horses going into the meet. And, you've got a handful of new riders. Declan Cannon has come in. He's one of the new faces. And, Luis Quinones is one of the old school standard guys that has been here a long time. John Court, of course. Those are some of the riders that you'll see. Santana is a very big force. Ramon Vasquez should also have a good meet.
What about from an angles perspective, doing the Oaklawn analysis for the past several years? Are there any go-to angles you have, things that you look for to try to find winners in this meet?
Yes, it is a difficult meet to handicap. There are a lot of variables, just that come with winter racing and how your surface plays and whether it's a laboring track because you can't put as much water on it due to freezing temperatures. So that's one thing to kind of see how your track's playing, watching the weather closely, whether you're going to have that deeper laboring. It is a sand-based type of track. One thing also to keep in mind, particularly early in the meet, there are some races that are ridden for 3-year-olds and up. Now, when we say 3-year-olds and up, those are horses that just turned 2, facing some older horses that just turned 3. Just coming off their 2-year-old season. So I tend to gravitate towards older horses in those spots. I saw there was one of those races, I think, for Saturday. That's the first one I've seen this meet. So I try to pay attention to those types of conditions. Most others are for 4 and up, but there's the occasional 3 and up. And, those are some of the angles. Remember that there are 2 wires at Oaklawn. For folks, just a reminder that have been away from it for the past year. The first wire is at the 16th pole, and that is for mile races. They end at the 16th pole, and everything else goes to the
let's talk a little more about that bias you referenced. How does that manifest itself? Is it more of a speed is advantage versus closers being advantaged, or does it have to do with inside pass versus outside pass, or can it be a combination of everything?
Well, I think some of the factors that you do want to look at is, you're going to see that surface be tiring early on in this meet while it's colder, while the weather's colder. And then you're going to see that strip get faster and faster as we get warmer. I call it a pretty fair track, to be honest with you. I think speed is important. I think it's good to get position in two-turn races going into that first turn. I think that's very important on this track. And like I said, as far as trends, it's important to see how that weather's playing and what it's enabling the track crew to do. I think I tend to want a horse that has some recency early in the meet. Maybe that might help him a little bit versus a comebacker who's going to take that heavy surface, that laboring track sometimes a little harder than a horse that's been running.
That's a great point, and I think that's also very true what you're saying about, with the bias and with all aspects of handicapping and horse playing. It pays to pay attention, and the more you can get stuck in and pay attention to what's going on, the more you'll be able to figure out these things in real time. You talk about horses with recency. Have you noticed over the years, does any particular circuit seem to have an advantage in terms of horses shipping into Oaklawn? Do you give preferences to horses who've made their first starts at one track or another, or is it pretty much an equal opportunity situation and just more about a general recency?
Well, that's a good question, Pete. One of the things that I have seen or noticed, I think horses from Remington Park early on sometimes do very well at Oaklawn. That meet ends mid-December, so they've got just a little bit of recency on maybe some of the horses that are coming in from like a Churchill Downs off that November meet, So sometimes you see them do well, maybe a little better than anticipated in some spots. Right now, the Oaklawn backstretch is closed to horses from Louisiana because of the equine herpes positives at Fairgrounds in New Orleans. But maybe perhaps later in the meet, we will see some horses come up from Delta. And those horses that come up from Delta Downs tend to do very well here at Oaklawn because they are coming off a sand-based track as well. They're coming off that deeper type of surface, and that meet is on, and so they have that recency too. Certainly from a class standpoint, you're going to see those Kentucky horses come to the forefront as the meet goes on as well.
That's great stuff. I would be remiss to let you go, Mary, before we talk a little bit about specifics. I imagine you've looked at the first 2 days of racing at Oaklawn. Many of our listeners, Friday will have probably already happened by the time a lot of people listen to the show, but some folks are listening live, and they'll certainly benefit, as will the early birds. So feel free, take a couple of horses you're excited about from either Friday or Saturday from a wagering perspective and share them with our listeners.
Sure. Well, Friday gets underway with the fifth season. That's the first stakes race in the meet. And that's a good group of older horses that have come together to go around the ground the mile and 16. Smack is a horse, if he wins, he'll become a millionaire. I think the question with him is the mile and the 16 less than optimum for him? He's really a mile and 8 specialist, but he's also a very, very class horse, and so I think he's a big contender in there. But I also think they're pretty well matched, to be honest with you. It's a good bunch for the opening day. Pinson's an interesting horse who did run last out at Delta, finished a very close third in the Delta Mile, a $250,000 race. I look forward to seeing what he does. Code West is a nice horse as well in that spot, the fifth season. Moving to Saturday, the Pippin Stakes is for fillies and mares. It's kind of the first prep on the road to the Apple Blossom. And Streamline, she's a filly that ran second in the Apple Blossom a year ago. She really came to hand during the Oaklawn meet a year ago. And her trainer, Brian Williamson, said that had a lot to do with her moving to dirt. Her pedigree said turf. He was reining her on the grass. He popped her over on the dirt one day at Hawthorne, and she aired by 15. So he kept her on the dirt, and she became a
Excellent. A couple of cool things to look for. Folks interested in more of Mary's thoughts and analysis, look no further than the Daily Racing Form, specifically the analysis every racing day at Oaklawn. Mary, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Pete, thank you so much for having me, and I wish everybody the best this Oaklawn season.
Cheers.
All right, there you have it from Mary Rampellini. Always a pleasure to have her on the show as one of our regular contributors, and some good ideas there for races coming up this weekend. And I think we should spend the rest of our time, gentlemen, talking about some races this weekend. Typically, we go over the 4 public handicapper races. For whatever reason, we were feeling a little froggy, so we decided to jump and come up with a little bit of a different plan for the Friday the 13th show today. We're going to be looking at a few different races, including a couple of the PH ones, but also we had some races come in by special request from both Mike Hogan and JK, so we'll look at those as well. Why don't we start off looking at Gulfstream Park tomorrow? There's a trio of stakes races. The first one goes as the 6th. We're looking at a grade 3 turf race. Why don't we start with you today, Mike Hogan? What did you come up with in the Marshes River?
Well, I can understand why Scott and team did not select this one for public handicapper, because though it's a relatively big field, I think Isabella Sings is a very, very, very legitimate favorite. I think she's loose on the lead. I think she can dictate terms, and I wouldn't be surprised if she goes wire to wire. In fact, I'd be somewhat surprised if she doesn't. That said, there's one horse that interests me a little bit, not necessarily from a betting standpoint, but more from a this is interesting kind of standpoint. That's number 4, Elusive Million, who's trained by Patrick Biancone for Martin Schwartz. And that's a team that about 10 years ago was winning a lot of big races. And of course, after Patrick Biancone's suspension for being caught with cobra venom, Martin moved his horses to a number of different trainers, and most recently, notably, Chad Brown. Interesting to see this one getting back in the barn of Patrick Biancone. It looks like they've gotten the band back together. Julian Leperoux is aboard. He used to ride for a lot of the good ones that they had. And Pete, I'm sure you remember those good ones. There were some really good horses that Schwartz and Biancone teamed up for. I'm thinking of Aussie Siempre and Silver Cup and Ngara.
Gorella in that team. Yes, yep. Tempted as I am to make the band back together, made me tempted to make all kinds of inappropriate jokes. I do respect I respect the Marty Schwartz organization a lot, despite that, and I think that the whoever he's got doing bloodstock, I mean, they're consistently able to find horses to bring over who can succeed in the unique challenges of American racing, and I always take those runners seriously. JK, what about you in the spot? You never met a favorite with a pace advantage you didn't like. Is it all about Isabella Sings?
I don't know if it's that I'm excited that the NHC is coming up, so I'm like looking for these 20-1 shots that make me really excited. But when it comes to Gulfstream Park, and we'll see an example with this a little bit later with one of my favorite horses of all time, but when you can find a horse that makes up ground closing into a slow pace at Gulfstream Park, that horse I will then sign a contract for to bet until the horse wins. And Seeking Treasure, the one horse, is one of those horses. To the new time form users, to the old time form users, when you open up a time form PP on a horse and you see that they were closing into a slow pace and that color-coded blue is all over the pace figures of that horse, and they're still getting there and missing by a length and 3/4 or a half a length, please give me something for this horse to run at a big price. And Seeking Treasure is one that I'll try to build things around. And if I was playing in the NHC on Saturday, would be a horse that I would use on both entries.
I'll say one thing about my only concern, and I tried to make a case for a closer in this race. The rails are at 115. That is really far out, and that tends to really disadvantage the closers, especially when you've got potentially a loose leader and a very good horse in here.
You know what's funny is when that happens, when the rails are out and we don't do it for a living, I feel like the jockeys know that too, and they ride horses more aggressively forward when they believe that being forward is a position that's going to be advantageous. So it almost cancels itself out. And that's how I treat the world, right? Because otherwise I'll go crazy with all this information. That's how I cancel out the rail situation in my mind. Not saying it's not real, but explaining why I cancel it out.
That makes a lot of sense, Jonathan. And I'll tell you this, and this information surprised me, but friend of the podcast, Jake Jacobs, has studied the effects of rails on turf races. And the old saw is exactly what Mike said, that the farther out the rail is, the better it is for speed, the harder it is to close. And the data that he was looking at suggested that that effect is real, but it's way more real and relevant when you're talking about tight turns on a turf course, Belmont Inner, Saratoga Inner, situations like that, than it is Gulfstream, where it's so wide anyway. Now, logically, I was sort of with Mike, just thinking that it would still affect it. Maybe JK's rationale is why it doesn't have the effect that you might see. Maybe there's some sort of canceling out going back. But I can tell you by the numbers, JK's approach makes a lot of sense to me. I just don't see this as a spot where it's going to necessarily be good for a deep closer. But I assume with your Seeking Treasure play there, JK, if you were betting cash, you'd be playing underneath in verticals as well, or do you really have super confidence in this one's ability to get up and win?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Isabella Sings is the most likely winner. She's going to be loose at Gulfstream Park. I mean, what more can you ask for? But in a scenario in which I feel like Dickinson will have to kind of go from the outside a little bit to at least keep her honest, it feels like Seeking Treasure, stretching out, getting more ground to run. I mean, just all the things that you want to see in a situation like this. Inside draw, will save all the ground, will tip out, will make that run. She just feels like that horse when you're loose on the lead with a single like Isabella Sings, and you get some damn horse that's 25 to run, wanting at you late, and you're like, why is this happening? It feels like Seeking Treasure might be one of those times.
JK, let's keep it with you for the Grade 2 Fort Lauderdale, also at Gulfstream.
Here's my my pet horse. I feel bad. I didn't interact with Mike's show me yours and he showed me his formulator.
I was taunting you, man. Come on.
I was gonna jump in my formulator and put a note for him on Derby Day. Not last Derby Day, but the year before that, where I just said 100K plus exclamation point is my note.
You've got to explain your inside Twitter feud to the listeners who may not be following it so closely.
Divisadero debuted in February of 2015 and won first out for Buff Bradley. It was brought to my attention. I don't remember how I got it to my attention that Buff doesn't really win first out. And if he has one that wins first out, it's pretty impressive. Comes back, runs well again, closing into a slow pace. If you look at his time form figures, you'll see the same thing I just talked about. That blue time form pace figures all up and down. And then he came back at 8-1 on Derby Day in the American Turf and was a single in a $300 cold pick 3 that I hit for $42,000 and the first leg of a pick 6 that I hit to American Pharoah. So he's a pet horse without a doubt.
But I was less interested in the red boarding part of it, Jonathan, than I was Mike taking the start at
it. Fair enough. 1 point Pete, 0 points Jonathan. Anyways, my point is,
what did he say? What did Mike say on the Twitter?
He was just trying to get me. I think just to show my my note that I had on the horse.
I had tweeted out my note from his last race in the Manhattan, where I said much more forwardly placed than normal, widest of all on both turns, traveled 42 feet more than second place finisher, 53 feet more than third place finisher. The second place finisher was Ironicus Kiss. Who is, according to some people, trip handicappers, he's never lost a race. And then third place finisher was World Approval, who won next out. Of course, the winner of that race was Flincher. So that was my note. I tweeted it out, and then I kind of taunted Jonathan and said, okay, let's see your notes.
All right. Well, what are we doing here? Is this Divisadero? Is he going to get back to the top of the mountain here, JK? Or is this the start of a long campaign and you're looking in another direction?
I'm gonna take a joke from our friend Dan Kovaleski, friend of the podcast. in a group text. He said, "So here's the plan. We're going to fade DeVisadero his 2 starts at Gulfstream, and then we'll crush him again on Derby Day." Sound like a plan? And that's kind of how I feel. The only problem is that he's going to get a real pace to run at with Macagone, or I can never pronounce it, Macagone and Heart to Heart in here, drawn inside and outside. He's going to get a real pace. I feel like he's going to be shorter than 4-1. I'm going to go with Chad right outside of him with the 8-horse Almanar. I felt like that horse.
Oh, JJ stealing my pick.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I told Pete to come to me first on this one. So.
Sorry, Mike,
I just felt like the horse.
That's okay.
I felt like the horse was ranked last time in a slow pace. He's going to get a real pace to run at. You bet against Chad at Gulfstream at your own peril. But I'm going to go there this time. I'm going to fade DeVisadero next time, and then I'm going to bet him again on Derby Day in the Turf Classic.
There sure does seem to be an awful lot of pace in here between Heart to Heart and Diamond Bachelor and McKagan. I've called him that. I've pronounced it that same way in the past, Jonathan, but I've accepted the fact that it's McKagan. Now that he has his signature win of his career, I've decided I'll pronounce his name correctly. Mike Hogan, anything to add, or is your thunder just gone?
No, I do have something to add. First, I'll say it's McKagan if you're against him. It's Macagone if you think he's going to go wire to wire. It's McKagan for me, at least on Saturday. Because I do think that there's going to be a duel. I think Heart to Heart is not going to have it his own way, and that's usually when he wins. It's a big field. I think it sets it up for a closer. My note on Almanar is steadied and lost position on the back stretch, losing a couple lengths. He was ranked, but it also looked like he steadied for some reason too, and then went 40 feet further than the winner and 39 feet further than second place. I think he's sitting on a good one and will get some pace to run at. The other one I'll mention, I tweeted out about it, way out on the outside, number 12, Fire Away, just for Shug, is a typical Shug horse who's slowly progressing and getting better with each start. He could, I don't know if he's good enough to win, but I think he could run a big race, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has a nice future ahead of him. I think he's a half to Mr. Speaker, so.
All right, some good ideas there. Let's move it along to the Hal's Hope, another grade 3. Mike Hogan, who'd you come up with in this one?
Well, the first horse in the race is Dolphus, and I've got a card note, a race note, and a trip note for Dolphus, which almost never happens. I don't do notes as much as you guys, but the Dolphus race is a race that should have been a no contest in my mind. I'm guessing you guys have the same sort of thing. Other thing I will note, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we talk the Aqueduct race, there was a torrential downpour right prior to that race. The race prior was run in a torrential downpour. After that, Speed wired it on the dirt. It was all off the turf after that. Speed wired it in every one-turn race after that. And Dolphus, he got an easy lead. He went wire to wire. I hope he gets bet heavily off that 100. He's 12-1 morning line. He might be a little shorter than that, especially if people, I'll say it. He's Rachel Alexandra's brother. So bet Dolphus, please. I think he's vulnerable. I think Realm is probably the most likely winner and will probably be, a short price, but he doesn't interest me as much. The one that interests me a little bit is High Riverside, getting a little bit of class relief. Any of those horses he ran behind in the last race, Stanford, Key Nice, Awesome Slew, even Made from Lucky, any of those horses would be legitimate favorites in here. He gets some sneaky class relief, gets back to a track he's done well at, gets Castellano, he'll be a good price. And while he was no factor against Mr. Jordan 2 races back, I think it's a completely different pace scenario in here, and maybe he has a chance to spring a bit of an upset at a nice price.
All right, Jonathan, I have a general time form U.S. question for you that maybe you can use to segue into your opinion of the Hal's Hope. One of the things we're really excited about in our partnership with Timeform here at DRF is this Timeform US pace projector, and I think a lot of people have questions about how to use it. When you see a race like this that isn't identified in the pace projector as particularly a fast pace or particularly a slow pace, and you see 3 horses projected, really 4 horses projected very close to the lead, all of whom have similar pace figures, how do you go about determining which one is in fact going to be on the lead?
Almost means nothing to me. I don't even really do anything with this type of, I don't form any pre-opinion on how the race is going to be run when it looks like this. The only thing that I do, like we've talked about before, is I handicap in the order that they go. So I would look at the 3-horse first, then the 4-horse, then the 9-horse, then the 8-horse, then the 5, then the 1, then the 2. And that will sometimes give me a hint of maybe there was a mistake where I really think that someone's going to go to the front. But in this situation, I just handicap what I like, and I don't really look at it as much of a pace play.
Interesting. All right, well, who did you come up with for the House Hope?
Tommy Macho. Felt like the last 2 races, the horses had no shot trips. You get Pletcher in South Florida, which is always a positive. Anything even remotely encouraging from the guys in the DRF Clocker report on Tommy Macho training over at Palm Beach Downs, and it'd be the type of horse that I would want to build things around. It's a tough race, but he's definitely the one that I want here. One interesting point about Dolphus is I'll say I get that the last race was completely in his favor, but maybe the light came on a little bit, and maybe not. But I don't think the horse is going to be bet that heavily. I think the horse, there's too many other good horses in here. I mean, I think you'll get 10-1, 8-1 on the horse. So if you're a believer, it'd be one that I would consider. But Tommy Macho for me, and at 9-2, is the type of horse that in the NHC I would use regardless of the price. I mean, not regardless of the price, but regardless if I can get 9-2. I don't care what else is happening. I'll take the 9-2.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Mike. I didn't think that Dolphus would necessarily get bet here. You're just relying on the famous broodmare angle.
Maybe, or and just hoping that people see it like Jonathon. The light finally went on. This is a horse that showed some talent early. Sitting off a big race. If you don't watch the replay of that race, where a horse was held out of the gate. It was actually the one right to the inside of Dolphus, was held out of the gate by the assistant starter. He was declared a non-starter because of that. But because he was held, he made a left turn and took out half of the field, including the favorite, really any other pace rivals that Dolphus had in that race were eliminated at the start. It's kind of a shame that the race wasn't declared a no contest, because
what you're saying, Mike, is basically he pulled a Byron.
he did, but he pulled the Byron, and then he ended up running. That horse ended up running third, got third, but then was declared a non-starter. He was 5-1. If you watch the replay, you'll see that he's 5-1 when his chiclet hits the screen. But then they refunded everybody on that horse because he was held out of the gate. But the fact that the held horse interfered with such a large percentage of the field, I don't know why they don't just declare the whole race a non-starter.
All depend. Well, I mean, I could give you some.
I do
theories,
know why.
but
okay,
but yeah,
fair enough.
But
yes.
It also all depends on how the rules are written, and of course, sometimes the rules are written one way and they don't make it a non-starter. They don't make it a no contest anyway. With that, let's move on to Aqueduct. This race came in, I think, special by request from Mr. Jonathon Kinchen, did it not? Aqueduct's third race on Saturday.
Oh, geez. Yeah, you guys are going to be so disappointed in my selection.
Yeah, it's got to be some 12-1 shot we can key the whole day around and get rid of.
I just felt like, no offense to the beautiful people in Arizona, I just didn't really want to look at that race in Turfway Park. So when Turf Paradise, excuse me, when you guys said, well, where else then? I was like, Aqueduct race 3, there's 7 horses in a stake race. And then I didn't even look at it yet. And so...
All right.
I mean, I looked at it.
Give us a winner and you're off the hook.
No, I've looked at it now. I didn't look at it then. I like the 5 Yorkie Princess with a rad coming back. It feels like that horse has kind of always had an excuse. You know, the race at Belmont back in September was a crazy race. Was on the wrong part of the track. Then ran huge. Then ran on the turf. Then ran huge. I think the horse is going to run back. The Stone Street horse will take some money. Maybe you'll get a little bit of value on the 5 Yorkie Poo Princess.
I'm glad you said it correctly the second time. That's got to be a fun one for a race caller. I look forward to Travis intoning Yorkie Poo Princess tomorrow afternoon. Mike Hogan, who'd you come up with in here?
Well, I'm against Yorkie Poo Princess. I hope she does go favored. She's 2-1 favored on the morning line. Especially the last race. I mean, she had it all her own way against 4 horses who would probably all be long shots in this race. She hasn't faced any legitimate pace pressure in either of her wins. Both of them sure were impressive, but I'm willing to take a shot against her. I do like the Stone Street one. I think this horse looked real good in the debut. There was only one horse who was running at her late. who then came back to flatter that effort. The second place finisher won next out. And, you know, Kieran does really well. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I looked at all second start when he runs them in the stakes race after the debut. He wins at about 25% with these types. The pedigree's there. She looked good. And I hope everyone's on Jonathon's horse.
All right, let's bring this show full circle and talk about a couple of races from Oaklawn Park. The first one's actually a Friday race. So for many listeners, this one will have already happened. You can hear what we have to say and then quickly go to the chart and see who gets to look smart and who gets to look silly. Mike Hogan, this was your request, so we'll let you tell us about it. Are we looking at the fifth season?
No, this was Jonathan's request, but I can go first if you want. My request was the Smarty Jones, which is
okay.
Monday.
Well, we'll keep it with you, and you'll do this one first, and then we'll go to JK.
This is this part of the reason why Oaklawn's such a good track is there's 9 races today on opening day. 5 of them are oversubscribed. They can only run 12 in the gate. 5 of them have a couple AEs each, so you'll get full fields. This one doesn't technically have a full field. But it still has 10, and it's a wide open race. I mean, you can make a case for almost every one of them in here. I mean, Mr. Z, for instance, 6-1. So I can even make a case for him. I don't think he's going to win. I mean, the horse hasn't run a race where he's finished within 8 lengths of the winner in a year and a half. But he could be if he breaks well, he could be closer on the lead for a long ways. And Lucas does pretty well here. I'm going to go with a long shot, at least on the morning line. I have a feeling he'll get bet, though. It's a Jack Van Berg horse that he's getting from Jerry Hollendorfer, who'd been running some big races. Although he hadn't been running in stakes races, had been running against some tough company, stakes winners like Avanti Bello, Blue Tone. If you go back a few races, he even ran against a horse named Arrogate, I think is how you pronounce it. Buyer figure wise, this horse fits on here. Jack Van Berg had a fantastic start to the Oaklawn meet last year. He won 5 races in the month of January, 672 ROI. This is for a trainer who was probably in this 5 to 6% at Oaklawn in the years prior. Tailed off a little bit after that, but I think he might be coming in primed to start this Oaklawn meet. At least I hope he is.
I love those type of angles, Mike. Certain trainers pointing for certain race meets. There's a logic that they might get out the gate quickly and then level off like that too. Just the idea that horses are being pointed, the ones who are ready, the ones who fit that plan, going to come early in the meet. So I would definitely give that one a little extra consideration. Also, just wanted to underline what Mary said about Pinson. Pinson's a horse I've been following for a while, not just because I'm a big fan of the old Cincinnati Reds outfielder from my Stratomatic days, but because I think he's got some talent. He's one I'm keeping an eye on very closely entering 2017. JK, who's it for you?
Oh, Mr. Z for me, and I've been a notorious hater of this horse. If you look at the Time Form US pace projector, you'll see that they have Mr. Z loose on the lead. He's drawn to the outside. There won't be any funny business. He'll go on and go forward. If you look at his last 3 races, just when you have time, if you're bored, look and see who was on the lead in the 3 races he ran in the last time. Gun Runner, Grade 1 winner, Noble Bird, and Run Happy. None of those 3 horses are in this race. He's going to be loose on the lead against a bunch of kind of second-tier stakes types horses, allowance types horses, and I think he's going to be dead loose, and I think he'll run really well today at this track, which he seems to run well at, D. Wayne Lucas. I think he'll be loose. I don't know what the price is going to be. It might come down a little bit because I think maybe the world might know that, but Mr. Z for me, and then probably never again.
Is he still a racehorse, though? That's the question.
I am going to trust the coach.
I love the coach at a big price, but I'd need a lot more than 6-1 to bet Mr. Z with even with your money at this point.
You're not going to get 6-1, I wouldn't think. I mean, I do think you'll have a little bit built into the odds there of people betting on the finish positions. And Jonathan makes a great case about the paces and just the idea of running against horses who would horrify this field. I mean, I'm compelled. I would definitely include both the horses you guys mentioned. And I do see the case for Mr. Z. I mean, it's just as simple as the the oldest saw in the game, but it remains true. Pace making the race.
You guys didn't get, or at least if you got, you didn't comment on my little joke about the horse named Arrogate.
Oh, I was wondering where you were. I was wondering where you were going with that. I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean,
I was like, Arrogate. I was like, is it Japanese? Like,
if we're talking class
Arrogate.
lines,
Yes. Thank you for. Sorry, we had to make you run that one again, Mike.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Got that the first time.
There's no Arrogate in this race.
Yes, the great Arrogate, of course, along the lines of I think it all started with yellow agate as opposed to yellow agate, and then it just sort of ruled. So I think it was somebody on Twitter even who came up with, or is it Arrogate?
Yeah, and I will note after he faced Arrogate, he won impressively with a 95 Beyer. If he runs anything close to that, he crushes this field.
All right, it'll be a fun race to watch. One more race we're going to talk about, and we don't have to go in great depth on it. It's several days out. But another one of these early races on the Triple Crown Trail is the Smarty Jones on Monday, Holiday Monday, racing around the country action at DRF tournaments. Don't miss out. Get your chance to be involved there. But, JK, who'd you come up with in the Smarty Jones?
Yeah, I don't really have a clever opinion here. Here's what I'll say is that I remember from some Churchill buzz, uncontested went into that race. Working like out of her mind. The only question was whether or not she would stretch out. I'm sorry, whether he would stretch out. He didn't stretch out successfully. He went pretty fast. If you look at Timeform US, you'll get red numbers for his early pace figures. McCracken obviously is a really talented horse that ran him down late. The fact that Catalano brings him back to Oaklawn and is going to try to stretch him out again, he's one of those guys, one of those trainers that I just trust when he does things. Motion, Chad. When they do it, I trust that they know what they're doing. The fact that he's giving another shot, I think he's going to overwhelm these horses and win this one for fun.
Mike Hogan, do you have a selection for the Smarty Jones?
I think Jonathan's kind of right. I mean, I wanted to talk about this race, not because I think that there's live long shots. I think that the two most likely winners by far, I mean, I would be comfortable just using these two and throwing everybody else out, are Uncontested, who may very well be the favorite, especially off the big Beyer in the debut and then running well against McCracken. The one I would take a shot with, at least using equally, if not using more, is number one Petrov for Ron Moquette. And Pete, you mentioned Pinson, who's being ridden on opening day by Jose Ortiz, who's in to ride for the whole weekend. Make no mistake, Jose Ortiz is in riding Oaklawn opening weekend to ride Petrov. He is there for this horse. Petrov debuted at Churchill, ran a very, very good debut, won easily. And then Ron Moquette sent him to Aqueduct, which is something he almost never does. And he doesn't generally win second out in a stakes race. He almost won, and he was kind of against the bit of a pace. He was rallying into quite a slow pace. This is a horse that I think has some talent, and you'll see something on December 23rd that I don't think I've ever seen in my life. A best workout, a bullet workout at Oaklawn Park, 47-3, a best of 200. 200. Have you ever seen any workout? That is a lot of runners. I actually took a look. He was, I think, working in company, or at least got the same time as a horse named Pass the Buck for trainer Boyd Castor, who in the last start won the Zia Park Derby, Beyered a 90 speed figure. I think this is a horse that has some talent. It's Uncontested and Petrov for me. But I will say one other thing about another horse, and this is where I kind of texted you guys I was going to be breaking some news on the podcast. If you scroll down to Unbridled Eagle, take a look. Unbridled Eagle, previously trained by Dwayne Lucas, making his debut in the barn of Steve Asmussen. Owned still by Willis Horton Racing. Willis Horton and Dwayne Lucas have been partners for a long, long time. With some very prominent horses. Will Take Charge Brandy, to name a few. There's quite a few really successful horses they've had. Willis Horton is no longer with Dwayne Lucas. I actually emailed Mary Rampellini and said, "Is this a one-time thing?" And she said no. Oaklawn said that they're actually made a split going forward. Willis Horton's not going to have Dwayne Lucas as his trainer. This is not quite maybe Baffert and Kaleem Shaw breaking up, but this is pretty close.
All right, there are 3 things that are certain in life, folks: death, taxes, and Mike will bring up Take Charge Brandy on the DRF Players.
Well, Jonathon brought up Divisadero, so I thought it was only appropriate.
Equal time. Red boarding from all corners. That is an interesting little news tidbit. Those stories are interesting to follow, and you can sometimes catch trends that'll help you in your horse playing. I love the idea of just paying attention, Mike, and paying attention on the level of some of the stuff you brought up today, whether it's different relationships between owners and trainers and how that might affect things on the track, or certain operations pointing for the early part of the meet. Those are great little ways to try to get an edge, and I'm happy, very happy you brought those both up. That's about all the time we have. I know we started late, but it's a bit of a crazy day. I think we covered those races pretty well. I do want to shine a little bit more of a light on the fact that we have dwindling opportunities to qualify for the National Handicapping Championship, but we do have contests on this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, next weekend as well, tournaments.drf.com, each day an NHC qualifier for the next 2 weekends. We've also got some pretty cool Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge qualifying action. Go to tournaments.drf.com for a complete list of events, and we'll have a chance to hopefully see you out there in just 2 weeks, 2 weeks exactly till the start of the NHC. That will gum up our production schedule for the podcast, but we'll do that. We'll do that production meeting off air. I'm guessing we might just have one show that week, maybe on Wednesday, but we'll have all sorts of other special coverage of the NHC. I'll be out there. Not sure if it's going to be on DRF Live or Twitter, but we've got some special things planned. Should be a lot of fun. So I want to thank Jonathon Kinchen. I want to thank Mary Rampellini, our special guest today. I want to thank Mike Hogan for all the great work he does on the podcast. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening and sending in your questions. Hit us up, podcast@drf.com. My name's Peter Thomas Fornatale. If you're playing this weekend, I hope you win all your photos.